So women had the usual range of mixed emotions about being pregnant that any woman, particularly any multip, would have. They were worried about birth, they were worried about other things. But what was different, and they were pleased to be pregnant, all of these women had wanted this second or third or fourth pregnancy. But they were really, really anxious about birth, and that overrode anything else. So it wasn't that these women didn't have anything else going on in their lives. We had quite a lot. Somebody's partner had lost his job, somebody had been made redundant, and somebody else had had a forced house move. But when they talked about these things, they said they're the little stresses compared to birth. They're the other things going on. So birth was their major concern, even at 12 weeks pregnant. I didn't ask women how they felt about their bump, but they raised it spontaneously. Over half of the women raised it. And they raised it saying, there's more distance, it's different to last time, I don't feel as connected. So in that early antenatal period, that concern about birth was already affecting how they felt about this growing baby. And they felt that was different to the first time. For some of the women, it was simply a practical matter. One woman had 4 children under the age of 5, and she said, if I get a chance to brush my teeth, it's a luxury. I don't have time to remember that I'm pregnant. But for some, it was actually a conscious choice that they were trying to protect their mental health by not being as excited about this pregnancy. Women were gathering and analysing information massively. This was their major preoccupation. They were getting information from all sorts of different places. They were going to healthcare professionals, they were reading books, they were reading journals, they were looking at the media, and by that I mean internet and TV. One born every minute was discussed quite a lot. They were going to groups, they were talking to other individuals. Some of those individuals were lay people with an expertise, doulas, lactation consultants. Some of them were talking to other mums who'd had a similar experience. And they were not just taking this information in like a sponge. I think we have this idea, oh, Dr. Google, you Google your symptoms and you can diagnose yourself with anything. They weren't. They were really, really carefully analysing all of this information. But what that meant was they analysed all of the information. So suddenly what a consultant said to them was subject to the same scrutiny as what something off Google was subject to. And that meant that they noticed when they were given incorrect information. And when they were given incorrect information, they suddenly distrusted all the information given to them by every healthcare professional that they came across. So Becca was told by her midwife that if her scar ruptured, she was hoping for a VBAC birth, it would be catastrophic and she would definitely die and so would her baby. It's not true, and she knew it wasn't true. But then she didn't believe anything that any other midwife or consultant said to her. Women were gathering the information in order to make plans for this birth. And for some of them, that planning actually started before they conceived. Women were booking independent midwives, checking they were available. They were talking to consultants about whether they could have an elective section before they actually got pregnant. And what was really nice about this study was that there was a whole range of women involved in it. In the end, there were 2 women who free birthed. There were women who had a home birth with NHS midwives. There were women who had a hospital birth, midwife-led unit birth, labour ward birth, medically recommended section and non-medically recommended section. And they were all doing the same processes, even though they wanted very different births. 2 of the women were with new partners to their previous birth, and they prepared their partners starting before conception. They had them reading things, they had them watching things, they took them to birth reflections meetings with them before they tried to conceive, because they needed to know that their plans would be supported. And women worked from the birth backwards. So I want a home birth. If I have a GTT and it says this, will I be still allowed to have a home birth? I want an elective section. If I jump through these hoops, will I be allowed it? If I go and see the consultant midwife and she recommends that I don't have a section, will I still be allowed it? At this point, at 12 to 20 weeks, some of the women were sure about the birth choices and others weren't. 2 of the women didn't want to make plans at all. And the reason that they didn't want to make plans emerged throughout the data. So at this point, I didn't know why those 2 women didn't want to make birth plans. But the thing that I did know was that both of them had had 2 previous traumatic births and no good births in there. And later on, it turned out that the first birth had been crap, the second birth they'd planned for really carefully, and it had also been traumatic. And so they were not just saying, I'm not making a plan, let whatever happens, happens. They were angry about the idea that they would be asked to make a plan because they saw this as like a false security blanket. They'd been told to make a plan and everything would be okay, and then it wasn't. So they were quite angry with me sometimes when I asked them about their plans. And yet later on it emerged that both of them had very detailed plans in their heads. They just weren't going to write them down. The reason for making the plans was all about staying in control. It was about having the choices respected. And that was the same for the women who were planning a free birth and the women who were planning an elective section. This lovely quote from Taylor: the first time round I'd just done what I was told. This, everything is my choice. It's my choice. It's my baby, my body, my birth. I don't want to do that. That's not going to happen this time. And the focus of all of the plans was about avoiding the loss of control, because the loss of control had been traumatic to the women. Where they were most scared of losing the control depended on what happened in the previous birth. So this is why the content of the plans varied so widely, because it was still about the previous birth. That's still what they were making plans in reaction to. If they had had control taken away by somebody, usually a healthcare professional, that was the thing that they really wanted to avoid. The events of the birth were less traumatic than that loss of control. And already, talking to women at 12 weeks, they were preparing for every single antenatal appointment as though it was going to be a battle. Every appointment, they described pacing up and down the room beforehand, practicing in front of husbands, rehearsing. If they say this, I'm going to say that. There was no trust and no idea that they would be supported. I think we use the words choice and control sometimes as kind of like it's a fluffy edge of birth and it's not the important bit. But I want to show you the next quote to demonstrate how fundamental this was to these women. Luna's first baby died in labour. Luna's second baby was induced in hospital and was medically uneventful. In her third pregnancy, she said that while she was incredibly distressed still about the loss of the baby, she would rather go through the first birth again than the second because she felt so bullied. Women wanted support for the choices that they wanted to make. They wanted to know that their plans were going to be supported. And they wanted support from 3 different groups of people: healthcare professionals, partners, and family and friends. They wanted different support from each group. Interestingly, in these first interviews, midwives were surprisingly absent for almost all the women. In some cases, that was because this interview from the pilot interview, I haven't included any of the rest of the data, but the quote was just too hard-hitting, I think, to miss out, that she'd say that she was going to see the chocolate teapots when she was going to see the midwives. For this woman, midwives were absent because she didn't want them. She wanted an elective section. A midwife's job was to refer her for an elective section. That was it. That was the end of their role as far as she was concerned. But women were scared of midwives as well. They were scared that midwives were going to push them into birth choices that they didn't want to make. And every single woman was scared of this. It didn't matter if they thought they were going to be talked out of a home birth because it wouldn't be recommended after 2 sections, or if they thought they were going to be talked into consultant-led care when they didn't want that, or whether they thought they were going to be talked out of having an elective section. They were scared of having that choice taken away. And unfortunately, even at this point, even at 12 weeks, some women had already experienced that choice being removed in this pregnancy. So Luna had said she didn't want a blood test, but the midwife had written it on the form. And she said, the rest of the quote that's left off here, "Oh, can I just do it? I know you don't want it, but can I just do it?" It's not massive kind of coercion, but that was experienced by her as a huge pressure. And actually, that led to a deterioration in trust, and then she didn't see a midwife for her next 3 appointments, she just cancelled them. Where midwives were supportive, it was valued so highly by women. Some of the women, 2 of them, at this point at 12 weeks, had managed to already have their birth plans agreed by the midwife. And that was probably the most fundamental thing that could happen that would build a woman's trust. The birth plan might change depending on what happened in the pregnancy, but her midwife had said she could do what she wanted. In the interviews, at the time of the first interviews, all of the women were in a relationship with the biological father of this baby. It wasn't necessarily the father of all of the other babies. Women wanted the support of their partners for their birth choices, but they had really different experiences of this. Some partners were massively supportive. Becca had a partner so supportive he was actually annoying. Some women didn't. And I think there's possibly a role for midwives in helping women whose partners were just not getting that, who were not getting why they needed so much choice and control, because sometimes the partners had not seen that the previous birth was traumatic. And I talked already about the women who were educating the partners antenatally. Women wanted support from family and friends, but really, family was often about the practical support, and the emotional support was from friends more than family. And sometimes family actually brought emotional pressure rather than support. So pressure to have a boy, and Luna's mother-in-law was disappointed that she was pregnant. I've included postnatal decisions because this was one of the bits that surprised me most. I asked women about all these choices and they could tell me about them really readily. I'm making this choice, I'm making that choice. I asked them about postnatal decisions. Have you any thoughts about postnatal choices at the moment? And all of them said, no. And then went on to talk about masses of choices that they were making. Breastfeeding, I've got the number of a lactation consultant. I'm going to do antenatal expression of colostrum. I've already bought the syringes. I'm going to do something with my placenta. I'm going to stay in hospital for this long. I've paid for a private room so that my partner can stay over in the hospital. But they weren't choices, that was just decisions, that was just what they were doing. And the difference seemed to me, as time went on, that actually women assumed they had the right to make those postnatal decisions and that nobody could take that choice away from them. But they thought that people could take the choices about birth and antenatal care away, and that's why it played so much on their minds. So my conclusions were that even at this early stage, birth choices were already affecting women's feelings about this pregnancy. They were really carefully collecting and analysing information. Unfortunately, that was sometimes dismissed, and I had one woman involved in the research who had taken some information to her midwife about the fact that she'd had a private scan early on and this was more accurate for dating. And the midwife told her off and said, you know, this is just research off the internet. It was. It was a randomised controlled trial from the British Journal of Medicine, and the pregnant woman was a consultant, but it was still dismissed because it was from the internet. And I think we need to understand how carefully women are looking at information when they come to us with that. Women really, really, really wanted support for their choices, and if their birth plans could be agreed, which I know is a challenge for the NHS because we don't do birth plans until 36 weeks, but actually, if women could have those agreed at 8 weeks or 12 weeks, they relaxed. They stopped doing this feverish gathering of information. They stopped worrying so much about support, and they started to build a relationship of trust. But trusting healthcare professionals was actually really difficult for these women. Thank you very much.